Stop the Week with Robert Robinson.
Hello. Our conversations resume this evening with Tessa Blackstone, who's Professor of Educational Administration at London University, Dr. Michael O'Donnell, who's editor of the magazine World Medicine, Milton Schulman, drama critic of The Standard, and Laurie Taylor, Professor of Sociology at York University. We have music from Jeremy Nicholas. Now, you know, life runs pretty high and exciting and adventurous here. You probably remember as well as I do, that once we lost, who was it? Yes, Anthony Clare in the gyratory system just south of Northampton. But Laurie's actually ridden all the way down from York, and York is where it's all at. Did you swim to the station or slide?
I don't know. The most pathetic thing about this is actually arriving here from York after what we've been through in York, and one has to use that phrase, been through, it's the only one, and to arrive and to see all these sort of southern sort of people arrayed in parachute boots and Wellingtons and anoraks and sort of an elbow-length motorcycle gloves in order to deal with half an inch of snow. They're a pathetic lot. I'm, in fact, well, it's been rather comfortable shoes and suit and everything, and going back to face it. But actually, it has been a very difficult week for many people in York. Like I recall in a way that program that you did on cruises, when I think you said somewhere about the fact that you didn't know where the cruise ended and life outside began. It was rather like that in York for the River Ouse, because the River Ouse didn't seem to know where its place was at all, you know, and it came poking its nose up streets and peering into shops and taking over the bus station. And it was a time, the paper, you know, the Evening Press talked frankly about the Dunkirk spirit being necessary, and
Really?
and people turned to each other in shops with this odd phrase, you know, I see it's gone up another inch. My favourite was that, I think the favourite little bit of the week was there's a local pub, there's a pub just around the corner which is trying to sort of improve the evening trade, and it had in the notice, which it's had for 2 or 3 weeks now, it's a 60s revival night on Wednesdays, and my friend turned to me and noticing my new short haircut, said, I've got it, he said. You go in, he said, on the tide, on a surfboard. He said.
As Laurie knows, I went up to, I don't want to boast about it, but I did venture up to York on Tuesday.
Dragging your canoe behind you.
I asked after him and they said he was the other side of the water. But because of the floods, a historic medical event took place because the electricity failed in part of York on Tuesday when I was there. And I was solemnly assured by a local doctor that a patient had rung up the local health centre and the voice had answered, we regret the telephone answering machine is out of order. This is the doctor speaking.
What I did enjoy was the fact that my telephone number was 1 digit away from the National Flood Disaster Centre telephone number. So all day long, there must have been 30 telephone calls, people saying, excuse me, can you tell me what the situation is? And midway through the afternoon, I thought the only way I could cope with this was possibly to respond by saying something like, I would advise you to get your money out of the bank because the river is just about to flow in there. And I thought I could end capitalism in York as we know it by just simply the Flood Control Centre advising quick withdrawals from the bank.
I suppose you were all right in Eaton Square, were you? In Eaton Square, just a little damp pavement.
Yes,
You got your man to carry you over at Sloane Square, I imagine.
Yes, he did actually. He wasn't bad. He had a rather large back, and I used to clamber on him every day, and he used to run all the way to Fleet Street.
Good fellow. Actually, that does remind me of a classic expenses story, perfectly true. You'll appreciate being a Fleet Street man. I looked over a colleague's shoulder once. He'd been up in Scotland doing some story, and there he'd written bold as brass, to being carried across brook by gilly, 30 shillings. There are 1 or 2 letters, but only one of which, perfectly irrelevant to anything that we have been discussing, I want to draw your attention to. It's from Ron Rogers, who doesn't give his full address. It's Gillingham or Gillingham. And he begins by saying, it is not generally known that the President of the Gambia is a vet. And I thought, as soon as I read that, I thought, this man is a wag, he's having me on, and I darted to my who's who, and he is a vet. And so what Mr. Rogers goes on to say may well be true also. He says, it's even less generally known that Sir Dawda Jawara's meetings with the Queen are an opportunity for Her Majesty to have consultations on the corgis. And he ends up saying what he's very good at is curing the corgi's eczema, which is induced by sleeping on velvet. I just thought I'd tell you that because he thought he'd tell me that.
Do you think he has any vets in his cabinet, like Mrs. Thatcher?
Well, yes, but
It reminded me of the best Morecambe and Wise joke at Christmas is where, I think is it Ernie who picks up a copy of a book which is called How to Get Rid of Acne, and Eric says, that's a pity my mother-in-law lives there.
yes. Well, there you go.
So do I.
You can see that Christmas is still hanging over us dreadfully. And I'm about to start by saying people who think Christmas is a stoppage that extends to the New Year are taking altogether too simple a view of the thing, and they're leaving out of account a lingering side effect, a sort of chronic embolism, which gums up the calendar till well into February. Of course, I mean the sales. It'll be getting on for the middle of next month before decent citizens can enter shops again. And by decent citizens, I mean people who don't think overcoats in purple herringbone are suddenly made acceptable by having 10 quid knocked off. Or enormous tomato-coloured boots begin to look less like ketchup because their price has been, to use the technical term, slashed. And I notice that Laurie doesn't wear his anymore. That's another thing about stuff bought at sales. I'm sure Laurie's going to agree when I give him a chance. I've finished saying all this. Gear bought at sales just go on looking unpleasantly novel. Draws the wrong sort of attention to itself, like a Lurex tie. And that's why Laurie's old tomatoes, tucked under the stairs next to the vacuum cleaner, never taken walkies. Well, you can't go into shops at sale time, can't do it. The avidity of the punters and the scorn of the staff keep me well away, not to mention the danger of tripping over the sleeping bags of madmen who queue for 3 days to buy gold-plated music centres, sit up to get their pictures taken by the papers, or radiant with greed. Trouble is, middle of January, you need a pair of trousers, couple of shirts. Real trousers, real shirts aren't available. Only the Mickey Mouse versions, they stick in the sales. And if an honest man does go in looking for the real thing, he too is likely to be mistaken for a cheapskate or bargain hunter, meanly buying at half price what he doesn't really need. Shops full of bargains are faintly unreal. Whoever heard of anyone going into a shop and saying, please, I want a bargain, as though there was a commodity called a bargain that you could buy by the pound. I shop for shirts and shoes and hats and ties, and I never pay more than I have to for precisely the article I want. But people looking for bargains will buy anything, just so long as the price is right. Punters rushing into sales are like punters rushing into betting shops, panting after long odds, putting the money on anything that offers 100 to 1. And ignoring the fact that the horse, or indeed the suit, has got 3 legs. Now, I say you're going to agree with all this.
This confirms my impression, which is sort of based on watching your cruise programme. You're actually turning into the Queen. You are. I mean, you don't want anything to do with money, do you? Or sales or shops. I mean, I just think that probably you sit in your chair and you say, I think I'd like this. And somewhere far away, someone orders it, people make it, there's a distant click of an adjustment being made to your account, and the next day it arrives.
Rather nice idea.
Why I like sales is because it puts you in touch again with money and with the fact that bargaining is back on the streets again. I've always disliked the way in which sort of places like Oxford Street pretend that sort of money isn't involved. And in sales, there's no doubt about it. People are chasing after. There's real purchase. There's real bargain. There's a nice sense of solidarity between those people who are out to get what they can. And it's nonsense to say that people don't get bargains from it. I don't want to play sort of Ernie Wise to your Eric Morecambe by saying many of the things I'm wearing at the moment were bought in sales. So I won't say
You're
it.
trying to disarm me there.
I think the trouble about your analysis, Bob, is that it's based on the sort of notion that it's okay to go out and buy very big things cheaply, but the sort of things
You mean
that you
big
buy...
overcoats
Yes,
or
no,
outside
much
boots?
bigger than that, much bigger than that. The sort of thing you
Maybe
buy in your
fridges.
local departmental store is beneath you, but I could see you very happily in a wine auction buying 20 cases of the best Bordeaux
Absolutely.
quite
You've reminded
cheaply
me of
and
something.
feeling very pleased with yourself.
But not-
Similarly, I can see you at the antique auction
Yes.
buying the Jacobean chest
Well
or a
done,
nice
Let-
bit
let-
of
let- I have to
Georgian
come in.
silver.
Let the swine
Way
get it in.
below
I
what
just
you
have
would
to
normally
remember,
pay for it.
you've just reminded me of a conversation about 2 months ago. I came in and he was saying, would you have to drive it in Belgium? And I thought, what's he talking about? He said, do you have to actually sort of get on the roads and drive it around Belgium a bit? And people were saying, no, you don't. You just simply get it in Belgium, bring it through the customs. And he was talking about going to Antwerp or somewhere in order to get a cut-price Volvo at Belgian prices.
In support of my cut price, nothing. Ask a Belgian. He doesn't think they're cut price. No. I said earlier, I will always get at the keenest possible price the precise article I'm after. And if a joyous jaunt to Antwerp, and you know the roulette wheels never cease to spin in Antwerp, and the slow-eyed girls, why not?
I think on the way to the studio here, I saw a thing, this week's bargain, light up her eyes with an electric toaster, it said.
I don't believe it.
But I mean, it's just got to sound right, a bargain. A couple of weeks ago, in the Sunday Telegraph, there was a bargain weekend at a hotel in Bournemouth, and it actually read, "Indulge yourself at Langtree Manor, 3 days for the cost of 4 days at most other 3-star hotels."
I think most people do want bargains. I think most people actually go into a shop and are delighted by the fact that the shopkeeper is going to lose money on the deal. And I think this is very attractive to a great many people. There are whole races of people who never buy anything except wholesale. When Mrs. Goldberg was on her deathbed, her husband said, "Hannah, what's your last wish?" And she said, "Buy me something retail."
Yeah, and as good now as it was then. Excellent.
Well, I have to admit that I did actually go to the sales last Wednesday, and in an enormous rush, I bought myself a pair of boots. And they're the most expensive pair of boots that I ever bought. They cost actually £70, but they actually cost originally £170. So
I bet they didn't fit you.
I walked out of the shop with a feeling of tremendous well-being, but of course, totally irrational, because I would never have paid £170 in the first place. So in that sense, I do rather agree with
I
you, Bob.
see you're coming to...
Anyway, I have to say that my well-being was rapidly dissipated, since I now have 2 extremely large wheels on the second and third toe of my left foot. Because you see, these boots were high fashion, which is what made them such a special bargain, and that means they have pointed toes.
You cannot have vanity at cut prices. It's the ultimate in meanness
You'll
or
never
greediness,
get-
and those two words
No,
are
but I
utterly
think-
interchangeable.
I remember last year going to a sale after Christmas and buying 3 ties. Now, I bought 3 ties, not because I wanted 3 ties, but because they appeared to look rather cheap. They had good names in them, like Christian Dior.
And you're
like
a
that.
dressy fellow.
Now, and the interesting thing about it was that I've always disliked those 3 ties. Now, I don't know why. They don't. There's no reason why they look worse
What's
than all
wrong
my
with
other
them?
ties.
Bought in a sale.
What's wrong with the Christian Dior Lurex tie?
It's all right if you're holding your cricket pants up, but not unless...
Well, no, there is something about ties. As a matter of fact, I received this year my 2 daughters each gave me a tie for my birthday. I know every time I go to see them, one of them is looking to see whether I'm wearing her tie or her sister's tie. And again, it reminds me of Mrs. Goldberg, who gave her son 2 ties for his birthday. And when he turned up at dinner the next time, she said, so you don't like the other tie?
The family Goldberg, where would we all be without...
I just think that the real threat to civilization, as we knew it about 10 minutes ago, was the emergence and the dominance of an entity that people call salesmanship. Now, when I was trained as a scientist a long time ago, I thought the way to make decisions was to collect information and examine it and test a few hypotheses and move slowly towards some sort of knowledge and decision. But then there is now an emergence. I mean, what we're talking about is salesmanship, nothing to do with selling. It's a different thing.
Salesmanship is a very, very simple technique. I mean, when I bought these terrible boots that are going to cripple me for life, the girl simply said to me, "This is the last pair we've got, madam, size 6.5," and that in itself was almost enough to
Yeah,
do it.
right.
And she then told me that in addition to the boots, there were these incredible sort of knee pads that were thrown in.
For when you fell over on the boots.
Onto
There
your
was a
boots.
time, Tessa,
They're
when-
beautiful. I want to show them to you. I mean, they're lined
And what a
in-
pity this
they're
isn't, as they
lined
say,
in silver
television.
leather, you see. Now, I'm now looking for an ice hockey
I thought they
player
wore
or
those
an
things
American
in cricket.
footballer who I could sell
Tessa's
these
knee
pads
pads
to.
are
I
done with
don't
the silver
know
matching
what to do
foil
with
and
them.
striped
They're rather
lines.
good. It is, without doubt, a leather yashmak. It begins to turn into animal, vegetable. What do you think, Samantha? I'd like to make it a little more personal. Are you not made uneasy by men, and there are some of my acquaintance, who boast of never buying suits, save at sales, and there they are in these suits, and the shoulders look as though the coat hanger's still in it. The back of the jacket just that little bit too short round the behind, the crutch of the trousers descending well to the knees, and the waistband just snugging under the ribs. And all he's done is buy a suit that's wrong almost in every particular because he liked the price. Such men carry their loose change in purses. Now, I know that glamorous piece of, you boasted that you buy all your stuff, and so you only said that to disarm me. I don't believe you bought that elegant suit, because I know when you bought it and there were no sales on at the time.
Do you know where I got this suit from? I got it from Granada Television about 3 years ago.
Do they they know?
Because
Was anything proved?
They said in order to do, I was doing some absurd program, which I, thank goodness, was never shown nationally, in which I had to sort of like walk around, interview people and stand here and talk about this and that. And they said, well, to do this, you can't possibly wear the suit that you're wearing. They took me out and I got this suit. And then somebody said to me afterwards, they said, are you going to hand it back? And I went to the producer. I said, do I hand it back? He said, no. He said, we don't. We just take it. So I've got it. And now I know.
You shouldn't have mentioned
well, I know.
this.
Perhaps I shouldn't, but I'm prepared.
Next time I'll go in my very tatty dungarees.
I'm sorry. In order to make my point, I'm prepared to leave myself open to solicitors' letters. That's how strong you are.
Now, you just a minute or two ago, Bob, you actually described it as somebody I'm very fond of in Dublin, the man in the suits at the sales. I mean, but he doesn't buy the suits himself. He gets sent to the sales every year by his wife, or every third year. He wanders around Dublin. He's all in tweed. That's the only difference. But they fit like the suits you described. And last year he was sent to the sales to get himself a jacket. Nothing more than a jacket. And he's a rather nice sort of detached character, and he bumbled in there, and he conscientiously tried on jacket after jacket until he found one that he thought was perfect. And only when he tried to pay for it did he discover his own wallet was in it, and he bought the jacket.
Oh, never. You brought us rather cunningly, with a glissando or segue, I believe the musicians call it, to what I look on as a section of this discussion, which is the different buying habits of the male and the female. And what I've been going on about really all the time is the frugality of the male, which I really rather disapprove. I think, and here I do lay myself open, but hear me out, I do think that frugality, the appetite for frugality, is a natural appetite in women, and that men appease themselves in other ways. I'll just make my point. Let me tell you why I think...
Just put a gloss on your prejudice.
Well, let me tell you why I think female frugality is admirable, and see if you can disagree with that. Their purchases are so often disinterested. You just described someone who goes and all he's doing is buying something for himself. Mind you, his wife told him to go and do it. But women are very often shopping disinterestedly for lots of people, whereas a man who goes in is usually buying the suit, whether it's a good one or a bad one, for himself. And a man who likes to display frugality, when all he's doing is decking himself out like what he thinks is a peacock, is some kind of cut-price narcissist. That you cannot say about women. Now, what do you think of what I say there?
No, you did.
I'm sitting here in the most wonderful glow. That the first time I've ever heard you come out with a comment which was so pro-women that I hardly know how to respond. But I think you're, of course, absolutely right. I mean, it's we women who have to bother our tiny little minds with things like replacing the pillowcases that are fraying at the edges and restocking the cups with broken handles and the smashed glasses.
And there are no thanks and nothing in it.
No thanks and nothing in it, and it's all a terrible bore. I think you're absolutely right, Bob.
There are limitations put on men, though, when making their decisions. The marvellous letter in the Daily Mail, not all that long ago, it was on, I think it's called Money Mail, the business page, and it said, I do not approve of alcohol, smoking, betting and fornication. I will not profit from companies that cater for those vices. Which unit trust can I buy this year?
The vulgarity of men in shops, and I speak, yes, I come to the penitent stool, I speak of myself. I mean, when I go to a supermarket with my wife, what I do, I start gleaning very fancy packets out of the deep freeze. Glamorous ice cream, that kind of thing. Even, who knows, little packets of smoked salmon, just a taste, just a taste. And there's my wife, she's buying Swedes, washing up powder, lavatory paper. And she does not quite get from her face the expression of scorn she has for the tourist that she's with. Now, men do shop in that way.
I begin to suspect that his New Year shift in ideology is beginning to wear a bit thin. This is beginning to sound like a celebration of his sensitivities, isn't it? Time to stop.
Indeed. Time to have a little music. How well you nudge me there. Let me just find out again what the name of the picture... Yes. How could I have forgotten it? It's called Bargain Hunters. Well, it might. And Jeremy Nicholas sings it now.
He's just come down to London and he's here in Oxford Street. An orange rucksack on his back and boots upon his feet. An anorak with badges, a camp bed and a flask. A woolly hat and sleeping bag, what's he doing, you may ask? He's sleeping on the pavement like a vagrant on the dole. Or perhaps he is a Boy Scout who has mislaid his patrol. Perhaps it's Edmund Hillary, the famous mountaineer. He's on his way to Everest, but what's he doing here? His first base can't be Oxford Street, it's miles from Kathmandu. No, this man's a bargain hunter, and he's first in the queue. A bargain hunter, a real-life bargain hunter. He's been camping out like this since Christmas Eve. Though the temperature at night is -7 Fahrenheit, in conditions that an Eskimo would find hard to believe. But he's a bargain hunter, a hardened bargain hunter, and the mink coat that he's seen is worth the wait. So he's praying that despite the fact he's suffering from frostbite, the doctors will not have to amputate. Veteran of every sale, he always heads the queue. He's first in line at Selfridge's and he's first at Harrods too. The staff watch in amazement as he shoots off like a bat. He can get up to the second floor in 30 seconds flat. He grabs the nearest thing to hand in a desperate onslaught. He hasn't got the faintest notion what the hell he's bought. He's got 2 colour sets at home, one more will do no harm, as he stuffs a pile of cut glass underneath his other arm. Another set of Royal Doulton stacked up in a heap. He doesn't really want it, but he'll have it 'cause it's cheap, 'cause he's a bargain hunter, a ruthless bargain hunter, and his elbows can be lethal, so stand clear. He'll stamp on you to get there for a video or deck chair. He reverts to normal only when he's got past the cashier, for he's a bargain hunter, a hardened bargain hunter, and he does his Christmas shopping in the sales. Next week he's flying to the States, for every January he waits for the doors to open up at Bloomingdale's.
There, that was Jeremy, and he was singing Bargain Hunter. Now it's a matter of dreams. Laurie.
Yes, I see that somebody called Oliver Gilly has recently been busy putting Freud right. Mr. Gilly, in writing in the Sunday Times, has produced some rather shaky evidence that Uncle Sigmund's theories cannot be entirely trusted because he didn't come clean about the probable fact that he was probably having a possible affair with his sister-in-law. Well, it doesn't really matter much about the crudity of Mr. Gilly's attack. I mean, why wear anything much subtler than heavy boots if you're out to kick a corpse? For although Freud may be alive and well in academic circles, in everyday life we have less and less time for his celebration of inner life. As Milton Schulman said somewhere, I think it was in Civilization and its Discontent, getting and spending we have laid waste our
Yes,
unconscious.
it was.
Yes, I thought so.
Volume 3.
Take dreams, as you mentioned, Bob, and I do so because of oddities in the news this week. A Stockport man dreamt of the death of his wife at the moment it happened, and a Tel Aviv man dreamt he was a dog and bit his wife. Now, Freud could actually write about them, knowing that his readers were waiting for a solution. What on earth was the meaning of all these pictures and fantasies and stories which raced across our mind? Did they bring news of the past or of the future? Should we trust them, see within them a truth that conscious life denied? What had Freud to say about it all? But today they seem like nothing more than distractions, B features on the 10th-rate television channel which flicks into action after the epilogue. And nobody but the most life-sucking bore would dream of raising them at coffee time. Gosh, I didn't half have a funny dream last night, or, oh, I dreamt about something just like that last Wednesday. I mean, these are equivalent in tedium to such conversational classics as I've just joined the SDP, you know, or have you noticed how Tiswas has gone off recently, or even I'd like it much better if Robert Robinson didn't talk so much. Now, I wonder if any of you find dream talk a mite more interesting than I do.
I don't think you got the SDP thing right there, Laurie. It really is, I dreamt I joined the SDP. No, you're quite right. You mustn't buttonhole people and tell them your dreams, because you're really saying you're such a jolly interesting chap that even the wastepaper baskets of your mind are worth scavenging. But, and I have to say but because that means that one or two of us are going to talk about dreams, I think, I have a feeling that the recurring dream doesn't have the appalling incoherence that you were talking about before, which really is why people ought not to tell them, because it really does sort of have a beginning, a middle, and an end. At least that is my theory, and I'm just wondering if anyone is going to volunteer to tell one of those. to us
Well,
now?
my most common recurring dream is a really classic one. It's the one of being found in some public place, like giving a lecture to 2,000 people, or walking down a crowded street, or at a huge party, and suddenly being aware of the fact that I haven't got any clothes on. It's the problem, I suppose, or the latent reason for that kind of dream is that you're terrified of exposing some weakness. Now, I used to have this dream very regularly. Lately, I haven't had it quite so often. I'm not sure whether this is because streaking has now become perfectly acceptable. It's a sort of Erica Rowe phenomenon.
There is something about Tessa's dream that's rather important. Scientists have proved that
That's a phrase I seem to have heard
They're
before
all lined
somewhere
up
in my
here.
childhood.
You're gonna bring them on in a minute.
women sleep more lightly than men and dream.
They weigh less. They must do.
Yeah, I won't let you bully him.
They've got no
They
clothes
sleep
on,
more lightly
and they're
than-
nude in bed, and therefore
they
worried
dream
about-
more. At least that's the proposition. They have more dreams. And of course, the theory is that this isn't that they dream more, that they talk more about their dreams than men do.
You didn't tell us the
no.
recurring dream you had,
the
but no
recurring
doubt
dream.
you
Well,
will.
the recurring dream, and again, I'm sure this is probably not a dream that women have. It is of being going into a classroom to take an examination in which I know nothing at all. And I wake up in a cold sweat having had that dream. Now, I'd be very surprised if women ever have that dream, or
Why,
very few
though?
of them.
I've had it on numerous occasions, and it's only another version of the
Yes.
being naked in
Absolutely.
public
I've never
dream.
heard
It's
such a-
exactly the same.
I've never heard such a
It's the
preposterous
feeling that
thesis.
you're...
I was rather pleased by the way that Laurie dated the sort of the Freudian interpretation bonanza that went on when I was a growing lad. I mean, I spent 6 months working in a unit where we used to wake people up and ask them what they were dreaming about. The terrible thing about it was our leaders. We used to do impish things like interpreting these dreams. I can remember people solemnly wrote on notes that this man dreams about women's legs, because this is an erotic dream, because these legs lead to areas of delight. And I wrote at the bottom, being a cheeky lad, I suppose a foot fetishist is a man who took the wrong turning at his mother's knee.
Yes.
I tried hard while the others were talking to think of it. I thought I'd grown out of dreaming. I only dream when I'm awake now, I've decided. But I have recently, only because of particular trauma that I've been suffering, had a sort of add-on dream. I mean, this has happened to me in the last 3 weeks because of what's been happening to me. And I've been sleeping lightly, and each night the story's got a bit further. I started off wandering around in a sort of basement. The next time I had some explosive with me, and then I was attaching this explosive to a pillar, and then the pillar revealed itself to be the foundations of an enormous building. And then later, this is dream by dream, episode by episode, this revealed itself as the headquarters of a certain publishing company
This
in
isn't
New
a
York.
dream, you know. I think you, like the man who thought he was dreaming he was a dog and was biting his wife, may well have fumbled in the glass and put his false teeth in before he became Towser. You
But
may well
you
be
see,
doing this.
I'm waiting for the guy. Somebody tonight is going to appear and say, "Let's bring the whole thing down, man." I mean, I think it's interpreting itself
What
as
is
it goes
interesting
along.
about Michael's dream is that he's remembered it. I find the most difficult thing to remember any dream I've ever had, and the kind of evanescence of dreams. And it must be that now that he's got this serial, Coronation Street, running in his head, you know, that every night a new episode is occurring, that it is
It's
enabling
Sixth
him to
Avenue,
remember
actually.
them
I
all.
have
you
to
know?
be a bit more. I think we have to be a bit more serious about this, because it is of course possible to remember dreams, and part of the reason why we decide not to remember them, I mean, that Freud advocated the fact that we should actually keep a dream book, and that when we wake, we should write down in that what we remembered of our dreams. And indeed, when I do that with students, when just talking about Freud and using that technique, that you find that people come in and are surprised by the amount they dream, by the number of dreams they have, and actually it's possible and to introduce them to an obsession with that area. This is not difficult to do, and that is part of the way in which we have decided that we will not pay attention, that we will not concern ourselves with it. What I said originally, and I'm not quite certain why it is. Perhaps we find that external reality is continually winking and nudging us and taking us away from that inner world.
No, I don't think it's that. I don't think it's that at all. I think it's a combination of all being a bit of an effort. I mean, to have the pencil and the pad by your bed and leap out and start writing it all down. And there's also the feeling it's all a bit self-conscious.
Yeah.
That is part of the sort of modern conception. I mean, the idea that we spend hours of our day talking to people who have nothing very interesting to say. I mean, we spend time leaning against bars, repeating cliches, and we will not listen, if you like, to the workings of our workings of our subconscious or our unconscious. It seems to be quite surprising.
Isn't it odd that, you see, I would say that the reason, I don't share what you say, I think, Tessa, that it's all a bit self-indulgent, too much bother. I think that they aren't strong enough. The dreams that we forget aren't the ones that are potent enough. I think they do, in the light of day being very potent, vanish. Which is why I earlier did mention these recurring dreams, because they seem to me to be very strong. A friend of mine once described her such dreams. She said they have the power to stay in your body all day.
Yes.
And I know just what she means. They are threatening and ominous and as dreadful as anything
I
can
have
be.
just that dream.
But the ordinary, the fragmentary dreams that you have, which just seem as though some electric current is flying down neural pathways just by accident because you're asleep and reviving this, that, and the other. I see no reason.
That's exactly what Freud wanted to say. I mean, he didn't want to say that, as people have absurdly interpreted him, to say that if you dreamt, I read a book recently which said if you dream of anchovies, that means a great deal of suffering is in store for you. That's sort of nonsense. I mean, he wanted to say that recurrent dreams were significant and needed interpretation and pointed to some sort of underlying obsession. But mine is slightly connected to what we said before, is the fraying of reality, is the idea, is that cinema screen thing, like it's that modern notion that the picture that I see or the world that I inhabit within my dream somehow is fading away, is becoming more and more insubstantial, rather as though the batteries and the projector, which put the landscape there for me in which to exist, are beginning to run down. It's getting thinner. I can see the screen beginning to appear through the picture, and that's connected to another thing which sometimes occurs as well. Another sort of cinematic notion is almost of subtitles, is of words appearing across the bottom of the pictures, of life. And my fear, if you like, which runs through it all, is that, it's a banal fear, but in dreams, the banality of it never does anything to affect the reality of the emotion, that really that life is only that construction. It is only like a painted scene which is going to wear out, and that you're going to be able to wake up the next day and it won't be able to sustain you.
I'd envy you, actually, Tessa, Bob, I'm not so sure about you, Milton, certainly Laurie, because I think we're perhaps talking about two different things. I think this recurrent dream that Freud was talking about, Laurie's just been describing in such graphic detail, is really an entry into something. I don't like to use a word like subconscious because that label, but something under the consciousness. I think other things that happen, like when you work, if you want to find out what people are dreaming about, you wake them up, as Laurie knows, at a special moment, and then you find out what's going through the mind. I think that's a different entity altogether. I think it's just material that people can play around with. But I think that what Laurie was describing, what you were describing, is
I haven't
something
described it yet.
Well,
again,
yes, I nodded off there for a second. No, but when you were saying there were people who had recurring dreams,
oh, yes.
and they come back, and I think this is something different, and this is part of the person. Whereas dreaming about being a dog and giving your wife a bite on the nose is.
Very few dreams are recurrent. Of the total amount of dreams that one experiences, the number that recur again and again are absolutely minute.
Yeah.
I'm reading what some person who claims to analyze dreams had written, and she'd said that some woman had come to her and said she had this terrible dream that fire had separated her from everyone that she'd loved. And there was this huge wall of fire in front of her. And she remembered that this woman had come to her 12 years earlier with the same dream. And she looked up her records and found that immediately after that coming to her with that dream 12 years earlier, she'd been divorced from her husband immediately after the dream. And this time, at the same time as she was telling her the dream, she told her that her second husband had left her. So that the dream itself had a very potent relationship with what actually was happening in her life.
One of the most frightening things I think that I read, and I want to ask, we should ask Bob, because if you're sharing these things, you never get a chance to tell about your own dream. But just, I remember looking at some sort of recent analysis of dreams and talking about the way in which that dreams which change relationships around. This is very central to the way in which Freud talked about it. That there was no logic, and you had to understand it was a new grammar that you had to devise. And the thing which always provided the biggest frisson for me, which introduced most fear in me, was the sort of statement that one of the first things that you have to do in understanding a dream is to recognize that the you in the dream is not you, and that you may well be somewhere else in the dream. You may be an object, you may be another person, but do not, in fact, hang so much upon the nature of waking and conscious life to believe that that figure which stands for you is actually you.
No, and who knows but that the subject may well be the object. That's to say, the you may well be them, and they might,
Yes.
it goes round like that.
One of the interesting things you said earlier was that other people's dreams are terribly boring, and I think that's on the whole true, but there is an exception to that, and that's when you appear in that dream. And I have to admit, I hate to do this, but I'm always a little bit flattered when somebody else has dreamt about me. I mean, it's quite ridiculous that one should be, partly because
Not really,
what you have
not
just
really.
said, you may not really be you. I mean, you may be some sort of reconstruction of that person's infantile wish fulfillments, but nevertheless you feel that you are a more significant person.
I knew I was going to have to force my dream on you, because in my modest kind of, backing shyly out of the limelight way, I left myself to laugh. I do have one or two, but I'll only tell you the nastiest one. And I'm in the dining room at home, or I'm in the drawing room, and a lot of men are there, and they are redecorating it. And I don't know why they're redecorating it, and the colours and the way it's being done seem appalling. I can't remember having asked them to do it, and it's quite plain to me that I, in some way, am being violated. They have quite kindly smiles on their faces as they do the thing. At the same time, they casually seem to be ruining all sorts of other things. A table might get all sorts of nasty cement rubbed into it, or the chair might turn over and fall apart. And at the same time, I feel I've got to stay on the right sides of these people. I feel that although they're being rather pleasant to me, in fact, they're being very threatening and very derisive. Now, whether I'm suffering it or whether they're suffering it, I don't know.
It's the straw dog's dream, It's the straw dog's dream. It is the
it's
liberal.
very similar. Now, you
it is the
mention it.
liberal within his house,
That's
somehow
absolutely right.
colluding with those people who are violating his wife, his cat, I think it was, in Straw Dogs as well, and the very
Yes.
furniture instead. It is
Yeah,
the
yeah,
Straw
it's
Dog's
very
dream.
But who is standing? It is you. Now you mention it, I saw that film, which I quite admired, I must say. I thought its violence was actually, did have collateral for itself. But yes, it too was a dream.
And if
wasn't
you'd
it?
written
Very
that
similar.
down, you could have turned it into a novel like Kafka or Robert Louis Stevenson about Jekyll and Hyde, and these were all the basis of dreams. So one day you sit down.
Well, let
and
me
you
tell
write, "Here's a novel."
just to wind up with, it was Tessa who mentioned about how flattering it is to appear in other people's dreams, especially in the dreams of those of the opposite sex.
Absolutely.
Now, I'm not prepared. I certainly am not prepared to mention the name of the lady in question. She's not unknown to any of us sitting round these tables. And early on in our acquaintance, she said she'd had a dream about me. And, what shall I say, the situation was a sufficiently romantic one. But when it came to the push, I couldn't do it. Professor Tessa Blackstone, Dr. Michael O'Donnell, Milton Schulman and Professor Laurie Taylor were stopping the week with Robert Robinson. Jeremy Nicholas provided the musical interlude, and the programme was produced by Michael Ember.